It was the 3rd of September, 1989, 5:35 in the evening. The sky was clear and Flight 254 took off as usual from Maraba Airport. It was supposed to be a short 40-minute flight to Belém through northern Brazil. Passengers were relaxed. All they cared about was a football match that night. Even the pilots joined in, asking for the score over the radio. But then 40 minutes passed and became an hour. And then 2. Still no Belém. And then came the words from the cockpit no one expected. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have no idea where we are." They weren't near the city. They weren't even near civilization. They were lost, deep inside the Amazon rainforest. But how did the plane go there? And most importantly, what happened to the flight after that? This is the terrifying true story of Varig Flight 254, where a tiny dot changed everyone's fate. Earlier that day, the flight already had stopover at 5 cities: São Paulo, Uberaba, Uberlândia, Goiânia, and then Brasília, where the new crew came in. They were both young. The captain was 32, ex-Air Force with over 6,000 hours of flying time. And the first officer was 28, less experienced but eager. From Brasília, they flew to Imperatriz, then to Marabá. During the journey, they saw nothing unusual, except for some smoke in the sky from burning forests. And the captain landed safely at Marabá. Most of the passengers got off. A few stayed on. The first officer walked around the plane doing some routine checks. As everything was all right, the captain was ready to take off for the one last leg. 40 minutes, then done. But there was a minor problem. Between Marabá and Belém, there were no marked airways, just a suggested course written in the flight plan. So the captain did what many others had done. He entered the course into the system and simply trusted his charts. And the course is nothing but a set of numbers that needed to be entered into the plane's system in a very specific way. The aircraft's system will identify the route from that. And that's when a problem occurred, one that no one realized would turn out to be so deadly. The chart said the heading should be 0270. Now that actually means 27.0 degrees, which is a bit to the right of north. But the captain read it wrong. He put it in as 270 degrees, which is hard left, straight to the west. Then he entered the 178-mile flight distance into the PMS to help the system track the planned distance of the flight route. Point to be noted that PMS is a simple old-school computer that only measured how far the plane had traveled, but it didn't know which way you were going. Meanwhile, the first officer also came back to the cockpit, saw the heading on the screen, and just copied it without question. And the consequences of it would soon become life-threatening. However, at 5:35 in the evening, the plane took off from Marabá, thinking they were flying north. But being unaware of anything, the pilots and the passengers had no worries. In the cabin, passengers even asked about Brazil's football match. And the pilots also asked ATC for the score and passed it along. That's how everything started. At 30,000 feet, the view was clear. The captain looked out, expecting to see Belém's coastline soon. The PMS showed the distance decreasing like it should, but little did they know that the whole time PMS was tracking progress toward a wrong location, not the actual Belém. The pilots didn't show any concern until reaching the point where they looked for a signal from the Belém VOR. But there was no signal. The captain tried to fix it by checking the radios. He switched to HF radio used for long distances, and it worked. They reached an officer in Belém, who started relaying messages to ATC. Meanwhile, they were also able to make contact with another airplane by radio. The crew of the other flight said everything was working fine. VOR was good. ATC was loud and clear, so it wasn't a radio problem. Then why was Varig 254 not getting any signal from Belém? That's when they started looking and the truth hit hard. The captain looked out again. As they flew fast for over 23 minutes, the surroundings and terrain below them changed drastically and pretty unexpectedly, which they barely noticed, because they flew in a completely wrong direction, and now there was no coastline, no signs of the city in sight, but just an endless, deep, dark jungle. They entered an airspace where there was no air traffic control, no radar, no GPS. It was the great rainforest of the Amazon. During the journey, they didn't tune into the navigation radios at Marabá or Belém. They could have also used VOR, which is a short-range radio navigation system that helps aircraft determine their position and stay on course. But they didn't use it either. The captain just planned to find the airport by looking out the window. Why? Because he thought the weather was clear and he could guess his way to Belém based on speed and time. But see, this wasn't a car ride, this was the Amazon jungle. Plus, even if they went in the right direction, the airport at Marabá didn't have a control tower. All they had was a single radio officer giving weather and wind reports. So already it was kind of a gamble out of overconfidence. At this point, the pilots asked for descent to 20,000 feet. A TC approved it through the relay, and the plane started going down. But they had now a terrifying question. Where exactly were they? Because this wasn't just the wrong heading anymore. They were completely lost into the unknown. They didn't even have a radar or GPS to find out their own location. The captain turned the plane around and dropped to 4,000 feet, hoping to see something, anything, on the ground. But they were chasing a mistake. In their minds, they had to be near Belém. And that belief blocked out every warning sign. In fact, flying lower made it worse. Fuel burned faster down there. Time was running out while below them was the vast, infamous Amazon rainforest. The first officer started getting nervous. He pitched the idea of going back, but the captain shut him down. He didn't want to turn back to Marabá. He still thought Belém was close. The first officer made one last try by turning on ADF radio signals to check where they were. But one frequency caught a football match. Another caught a church service from Radio Liberal, supposedly in Belém. Meanwhile, the captain looked out and saw a wide river. That must be the Amazon, he thought. It matched the needle of ADF radio. So he turned the plane to follow the water. But here, something didn't add up. The Amazon flows east while this river flows south. Still, they followed the bends of the river, expecting city lights. But another hour passed and still were above the black jungle. Clearly, they realized something was not right as the 40-minute flight was not taking 2 hours. And that's when suddenly the first officer noticed something. The Southern Cross, a star pattern only seen in the southern sky, was straight ahead of them. Instantly, his stomach dropped. They checked the map, being extremely panicked. And there it was. That's when he officially discovered that instead of northeast, they were heading straight west. For 2 full hours, they had been flying in this wrong direction confidently. And it also solved their river confusion instantly. It wasn't Amazon, it was the Xingu. Worse, the radio signal that caught wasn't from Belém at all. It came from Goiânia, hundreds of kilometers to the south. Somehow, a freak twist in the atmosphere had made it reach that far. That's why in aviation you never use radio stations to navigate. So they were simply lost into the unknown. Under them was no man's land. And fuel was almost gone. You are expecting the captain to call for a mayday now, but no, he didn't. They thought they could still fix this. Wish they had even the faintest idea of what they had coming. The captain's guess was they were southwest of Marabá. He asked for a map that could have saved them. It showed a military airstrip, Cachimbo, just a short flight away. But in the dark, under stress, the first officer couldn't find it. So they kept flying south, straight into nowhere that looked like a black hole. The result? Fuel kept burning. And at that time, they had only 1,800 kilos left. Still, they didn't call ATC to say they were lost. They still had a working radio, but they stayed quiet. Instead, the captain decided to tell the passengers there was a navigation issue, and they would have to land somewhere random. That's it. It hit the passengers like the calm before the storm. Just imagine the scene. Passengers who were casually chatting about a football match just hours ago were now gripped by a terrifying question. Would they even make it out of this flight alive? Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the fuel hit zero. The APU that used to keep the lights and power running was turned on, and it burned the last drops of the fuel. Then the inevitable happened. One engine shut down, then the other, then the APU as well. And one by one, everything went dark. The next thing everyone knew was the plane was in a free fall, 1,000 feet every minute. The captain still tried to save it. He flew slow, just above stall speed, trying to make the plane glide. The first officer dropped the flaps to help slow them down. But with no fuel, the hydraulic pumps only overheated. As a result, a warning light flashed. The first officer flipped a switch, just like the manual said. That move drained one of the 2 hydraulic systems completely. The flaps froze, and the landing would now be even harder. But they were lucky the second hydraulic system still worked somehow. If that failed too, they would have had to fly the plane manually alone, nearly impossible at that speed. Meanwhile, the jungle was getting closer. It was pitch dark. The jungle below looked like a black hole. The pilots couldn't see a thing. Trees, water, hard ground, they didn't know. They just kept the plane afloat. The plane was dropping at 800 feet per minute. Speed was down to just over 100 knots. The landing gear stayed up. The pilots didn't even talk about it. Maybe they were too scared. And at 8:50 at night, the disaster happened. The Boeing hit the trees, tall ones 30 to 40 meters high. The wings tore off immediately, and the body of the plane crashed into the jungle hard, sliding through the trees like a knife through fabric. Then the aircraft came to a stop, barely meters before hitting even more trees. The crash was too hard, 15 times stronger than gravity. Seats ripped out. 8 people died on the spot, but somehow, 46 people were still alive inside. They started crawling out, some were helping, some were screaming. Some jumped off the plane, scared it might explode. But since there was no fuel left, there was nothing to burn. 4 people were badly injured and they needed to get to hospital fast. But no one knew exactly where the plane had crashed. There was nothing in sight except for the darkness in all the directions. The captain was hurt but awake. He tried to help. The first officer was unconscious, bleeding. Apart from that, no light, no food, no medicine, just pain and jungle sounds. At sunrise, the captain searched for the emergency beacon, a device that sends a distress signal to help rescuers locate a crashed or missing aircraft. But it hadn't turned on, as it was made only for water landings, not jungle for crashes. So they had to get creative. They filled a box with melted ice and urine. Yes, urine. They dunked the beacon in it to make it feel like the plane crashed into water. And finally, it worked. They picked up a signal, a faint crackle on a Walkman, but it meant someone might hear them. While this gave everyone a faint hope, a new problem kicked in: water. Clean water was hard to find. In the middle of a rainforest, they were still thirsty. A young forest surveyor among them led a few others deep into the trees. There they found a stream. Some drank, some cried, some just lay in the water, too tired to speak. Meanwhile, search teams were now flying out. Satellites had caught the weak beacon signal. Planes were sent, but on the first day, nothing was found. After all, the Amazon rainforest is vaster than you can imagine. After 2 full nights in the wreck, completely cut off from the outside world, 4 survivors decided to walk. Somehow, they reached a farm nearby. The farmer had no phone, but he knew someone with a radio. One survivor spoke into the mic. At first, no one believed him, so he gave them his name, his ticket number, his seat. And then finally, someone listened. Finally, 2 days after the crash, the wreckage was found. Turns out the plane was 1,100 kilometers off course. A rescue helicopter dropped food, blankets, and medics first, but it was too dark to fly them out. They spent one more night in the jungle, but this time they had hope. Still, not everyone made the night. 3 more died at the crash site, 1 more in the hospital. In the end, 12 were gone, but 42 survived. Just imagine, an error of not placing a point between 27 and 0 took 12 lives, injured 34 badly, and gave the rest 42 a lifelong trauma. Later, when investigators looked into it, the truth was simple and tragic. The flight plan had a typo. The pilots read 270 instead of 027.0. In other words, what needed to be just 27 became 270. Plus, when they realized that they flew deep into the jungle, they didn't ask for help. They only trusted the planet. It's called error persistence. When you're so sure you're right, you ignore the signs you're wrong. It was a mix of technical failure and human error, but after this, things changed. Beacons were fixed to turn on after any crashes. Pilots were taught to speak up, rethink, and not stay silent. Flight plans had to be double-checked, clearly written, and error-free. Otherwise, just tell me one thing. Didn't this case remind you of the infamous Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crash in 1972? But that's just another breathtaking story for another video. For now, if this story made you pause, made you feel something, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that shake you.